In this video, we're going to look at how you work out percentages without a calculator. And the first one we're going to do is we're going to find 10% of £840. To find 10% of anything, you have to divide it by 10. So if the number you have to start with, the amount of money, which here is £840, has a naught on the end, you simply knock the naught off. So 10% of £840 would be £84. If you had to find 10% of £3,200, again for 10%, if there's a naught on the end, you knock it off. So if you knock one naught off, you're left with £320. Now it may be that the number you have to find 10% of doesn't have a naught on the end. Say you had to find 10% of £856. You keep your 8, your 5 and your 6. But it can't be 856, it's got to be made smaller. And it's made smaller by dividing by 10. And if you divide 856 by 10, you get £85.60. The decimal point has moved in. Originally it was here, because I could have put my .00 in there for pence. And I moved the decimal point one place to make the number smaller. And because it's pounds and pence, I ought really to put another naught on the end. So it would have been £85.60. So if I do another one, if I find 10% of £41, at the moment that £41 could be thought of as £41 and no p. If I put .00 in there, I will keep my 4 and my 1, but I will make it smaller. So that decimal point will jump in here to between the 4 and the 1. So it's £4 something. Because it's pounds and pence and I need two things after the decimal point, I need to put another naught, or a naught there rather, to make it two things after the decimal point. So that's £4.10. So we're going to go back to work with this £840 again. We've already worked out that 10% is £84. When you've got that, that can be quite useful. Because if I double 10%, I get 20%. So if I add another 84 on, so if I add two 84s together, 4 plus 4 is 8, 8 and 8 is 16, I now know that 20% is £168. And if I wanted 30%, well, all I need to do is add 20% and 10% together. So 20% I know is £168, 10% I know is £84. So if I add those together, I will get 30%. 8 and 4 is 12, 6 and 8 is 14, and that 1 is 15, 1 and 1 is 2. So 30% would be £252. Okay, let's start again with that £840. And we know that 10% is £84. As well as going up to 20% and 30%, I can also work out 5% very easily, because 5 is half of 10. So what I need now is to work out half of £84. And half of something is the same as dividing by 2. So I need to do £84 divided by 2. Well, if I do 84 divided by 2, as an old-fashioned dividing sum, 2 goes into 8 4 times, 2 goes into 4 twice. So £84 divided by 2 is £42. So I now know that 5% is £42. But I can use the 5% and my 10% to get 15%. Because 15% is just 10% plus 5%. 10% I already know is 84. 5% I now know is 42. And if I add those together, 4 and 2 make 6, 8 and 4 make 12. I now know that 15% is £126. So, if we're faced with a question like find 23% of £840 and we haven't got a calculator, let's just go through what we've done so far. How can we get here? 10% is easy. It's knocking a naught off if there's a naught at the end. So 10% will be £84. 20% will be two lots of 10%. So it'll be 84 and another 84 added together, and we've already worked out that that's £168. Now, to get 23%, I need another 3%. Let's go back to here. 10% is £84. I can, from there, work out what 1% is. I can work out 1% for any percentage by dividing the 10% number by 10. And if you divide £84 by 10, I get £8.40. You've still got the 8 and the 4 there, but there's now a decimal point in there to make it a smaller number. So if 1% is £8.40, and I need another 3%, that will be £8.40 3 times. And if I add all of those together, 0 and 0, 0 is 0, 4, 4, 4 adds up to 12, 8, 8, 8 adds up to 24, and the one down there, 25. I need to put my decimal point in. I know that 3% is £25.20. Over here, I worked out what 20% is. So my 23%, I just add my 20% number and my 3% number together. I add together 168 and £25.20. So if I set those out as a sum, £188, and I'm putting my pence in there because I've got pence on my other number, and £25.20, and add those together. 0 and 0 is 0, 0 and 2 is 2, put my decimal point in. 8 and 5 is 13, 6 and 2 is 8, and 1 is 9, and the 1. So I've worked out that 23% is £193.20. 23% is a nasty percentage, but I've been able to do it by breaking it down into 10, which is easy, doubling that to get 20, and once I have my 10, I could easily then get my 1%, and then 3 lots of 1% was my 3, 20 and 3 gave me my 23% that I was really after.